Everybody, listen to me. Listen!
Beneath this sinister mountain, a man is buried alive, trapped by a cave-in. And from every part of a shocked and anxious nation, the crowds stream to watch the desperate rescue crews fighting against time, battering their way to the barrier of solid rock, while far below, a daring reporter makes his way into the treacherous, crumbling tunnel that is the only lifeline between the helpless victim and the outside world.
You'll be out of here by tomorrow morning.
No, I won't. They'll never reach me by tomorrow morning.
You'll be out of here in 12 hours. Hang on!
Kirk Douglas has his greatest role as the reporter who would do anything for a story. Jan Sterling becomes a star of the first rank as the not-so-heartbroken wife of the man buried beneath the mountain.
Maybe we'll have a couple of drinks. Maybe you'll even take me out for a big evening, huh?
Why don't you wash that platinum out of your hair?
Phony, below-the-belt journalism, that's what it is.
Not below the belt, right in the gut, Mr. Boot. Human interest.
Nothing you've ever seen before has the tremendous human interest of Ace in the Hole. For here is a startling story of human emotions and human desires, played against the most exciting fight to save a man's life ever depicted on the screen.
Now, when Smollett comes, you can give him your orders. Tell him to go in through the cliff dwelling, shore it up, and get him out fast.
Not through the cliff dwelling. You can't get him out that way anymore.
I don't know how to describe it except to say that, fortunately, we've become very close friends. And in all those years, you know, over 20 years now, I've never spent 30 seconds that were dull.
I was doing my first screen test ever, and Billy Wilder was the director. It was 7 Year Itch, the part eventually played by Tom Ewell with Marilyn Monroe. And I was a very argumentative stage actor. And I argued a great deal with Billy. I kept telling him that I felt rushed. It was awful, and it was a terrible experience. And then I saw The Rushes 2 days later. And it was perfect.
He's exciting. I think that's maybe one of the greatest qualities about him as a picture maker and as a director. He's so exciting to be with. He gets you up. I don't care what kind of a mood you may be in. Boom.
I thought a Hollywood director would have a bigger office. Isn't it too small for you?
Well, it's small, but it's gemütlich, as we say. But I do have another room there. Go and look. It's for my secretary. That is, if I can get rid of all that crap there. Hello. Yes, Walter. La meilleure chose. Excuse me, please. It's Mr. Walter Matthau. He tries to tell me in French what he's going to do, and it's going to may take a long time. Continuez, Monsieur Matthau. Very good. That was Walter Matthau. He just made the bed. Are we still running there?
Yes.
Okay, good.
You were born in Austria, near Vienna, at the beginning of this century?
That's correct, yes. Now, in order to kind of familiarize you with where I come from, you must, because I was born in 1906, and you must think in terms of Austria in those days. It was a huge monarchy of 56 million people, Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Czechoslovakia, parts of Poland, Yugoslavia. And my father, by profession, was an owner of hotels, railroad restaurants, coffee houses, spread through the entire old monarchy, which collapsed in 1918, as we know. And I was born in a small town. I was brought as a kid of 2.5 years old to Vienna. I went there to grammar school, then to high school, what you would call lycée. And the great endeavor of my father was, when you have two sons, one will become a lawyer, the other one will become a doctor. Well, I had a brother. Neither did he become a doctor, nor did I become a lawyer. I became a newspaperman. I remember vividly the time during World War I. I was a little boy, but I, like everybody else, I would have to stand in line for sometimes 16, 18, 24 hours just for a couple of potatoes. There was nothing to eat. It was sort of the end of the line. I remember vividly the revolution. I remember the decline of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. And I also remember, to go back in time, I remember the Emperor Francis Joseph. I remember vividly an interesting moment. Emperor Francis Joseph died in 1916. And it was an enormous parade of the heads of other royal houses. A fantastic kind of show. I wish I could direct this thing with that many extras, that many black horses. And there was, in that black thing that was moving slowly down the streets of Vienna, there was a little a little boy in white. It was a Hungarian uniform of a 100 hussar with a white feather there. And that was Crown Prince Otto. And I envied that boy. My God, he one day will become the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
What kind of journalism were you doing? What type of topics were you covering?
I was covering everything, to tell you the truth. I was doing sports, which was mostly football in those days. I was also doing some reportage of a criminal nature. I would do the dirty work. My job would be, for instance, to go to the parents of somebody who was a murderer, who had committed a murder, to ask for a photograph, or to somebody whose family had died in a fire, to ask. A very, very embarrassing thing for me.
Did you meet famous people during your interviews?
Yes, I remember one day, for the Christmas issue, they always had an enquete, one question which they put up to many famous people. And I had to cover some of those. The question then was, and I remember it vividly, was about a new philosophy of politics, something called fascism. And it was a question about Mussolini, and what does one think about Mussolini? And I was sent within one day. Here are the people that I covered in one day. They were Richard Strauss, they were Schnitzler, Freud, and Adler. And Freud, and that was of course the most interesting, and I'm being constantly asked about that little episode, because they are really exploring every single second in his life. I remember that I arrived and I gave my visiting card to the maid. She said, Professor Freud is having lunch. She says, please announce me. And I was there in the salon, I was waiting, and I did see through a crack in the door, I saw the room with the D couch, the famous couch, a very small couch, tiny, with a Turkish carpet kind of flung over it. And pretty soon, Freud came out from the dining room with the napkin still around his neck, and he was kind of staring at that thing, and he says, are you Herr Wilder? And I said, jawohl, Herr Professor. And he says, you're with this and this newspaper? And I says, jawohl, Herr Professor. And he says, there's the door, and he threw me out because he loathed newspapermen.
I have the feeling, talking with people of your generation and coming from Vienna and of Jewish origin, that maybe because of the anti-Semitism, there was not a love story between you and your native city, that people of Vienna preferred Berlin. Am I right?
Well, it depends, you see. The younger ones, naturally, they preferred Berlin because that was the vibrant, modern city, especially the period where I lived there between 1927 and 1933. Those were 1926. They were the 7 great years, of Bert Brecht and of Schönberg and of the Bauhaus, and things were happening.
I heard that you wrote dozens of scripts in Berlin. The most famous was People on Sunday, a forerunner of neorealism.
Yeah, it was my first picture as a scenario, silent, mind you. One of the last of the silent pictures was 28, 29, and Robert Siodmak was the director. But it kind of gave me a foothold. I sort of started to become a professional scriptwriter, and I wrote many of the things there for UFA and other companies.
Did you feel already the lure of America in Berlin?
Naturally, everybody wanted to go to Hollywood, but it was the advent of Mr. Hitler that made us go into exile, which ultimately would lead many of us to Hollywood. When it became apparent that Hitler was going to take over and what his politics are, and that it's going to be impossible for any of us to work, the exodus started. Some, afraid that they could not speak any other language but German, went to Prague, some went to Vienna, but they were just fooling themselves because Hitler followed them and took over those countries very quickly. I myself, I went to Paris, and I spent about a year there in Paris, made one picture with Daniel Darieux, who was very, very young then, called Mauvaise Graine.
Was it a comedy?
No, it was a serious picture, kind of cinema verité, as you call it, about young, kind of Vitelloni type kids who are stealing automobiles.
Then you went to the US to write scripts.
I went there and I never came back.
How did you manage to stay and work there?
You know, when you are a writer, when you are deprived of your language, you know, you're more or less you're dead. So I then just had to sit down and start studying English. I went to night school. I had I searched for very handsome young ladies who only spoke English. That is a great help. I listened to the radio. I kind of tried to make a living by writing stories in German, which were translated, and I sold a couple here and made a few $1,000s. And ultimately, I sold one of those to Paramount, and they gave me a little bit of a contract there. In those days, I'm talking now about 1934, all studios had a huge amount of writers under contract. We had to deliver, like, I think it was 11 pages every Thursday. We had to hand in 11 pages of script. And you were assigned to pictures, and you wrote 2, 3, 4 pictures. You were taken off pictures. You were rewriting pictures. It was like a great big assembly line, a factory. And the lucky break we got was that the head of the writers department, he had an idea of teaming me up with Charles Brackett, a novelist, very learned and elegant man. And he took us to see Lubitsch, who was making 2 pictures at the time. He was looking for people who could write a script on Bluebeard's Hate's Wife, and that's the way we started. Subsequently, we stayed with Lubitsch for Ninotchka.
I think working for Lubitsch was a very important step to improve your craft.
Absolutely, enormously.
Did you feel like many writers working in Hollywood at that time that the system was very constricting?
Yeah, it was constricting, except that if you made a name for yourself, it was beginning to become an honorable profession, which it was then not, you know, because people came to Hollywood, you know, to make quick money. Writers from New York, stage actors, novelists, Scott Fitzgerald, whom I knew at Paramount, by the way, Faulkner. They would all kind of put their fingers in the pie, you know, but not with any genuine interest. They kind of looked down on movies, which, you know, is my delight, you know, because everybody has been looking down on movies, you know, as something kind of third rate, up until, thank God, the invention of television. Now we have something to look down on.
Ball of Fire, directed by Howard Hawks, was your last script before becoming a filmmaker.
Yeah, I wanted to direct. In fact, I spent all of my time on the set with Hawks and watched him during the shooting. I didn't take any salary. I just took a little learning vacation.
You wanted to go
direct.
into directing because you feel your scripts were betrayed, or you wanted to have more control?
I wanted to have more control, and I just thought that directing was all the fun. Writing is misery, writing is sweat, writing is hard labor. The fun is to be on the set if you have a good script and capable, or if you're lucky enough to have outstanding actors. That's real fun, you know. That's the thing to do.
You mean the writing is the toughest part of the filmmaking?
Well,
it's too much to do the toughest part, and somebody else does the holiday.
It's like making the bed for somebody, and then he hops into the bed, you know, and I go home, you know. Now, what had happened was, you know, that at this time, Paramount was making like 40, 45 pictures a year. They said, well, we like Brackett and Wilder as a team. We don't want to lose them. If that silly guy wants to break his neck, you know, how good can it be? And they let me direct my very first picture. But I knew what they were thinking. So I found a story that was absolutely kind of foolproof. It was The Major and the Minor with Ginger Rogers. And we got Milan, with whom I worked subsequently. And I made a small, very successful picture. It was a rather mild, chaste version of Lolita. That's what it was. That 24-year-old girl doesn't have enough money to get back on the train, but has enough money for a child's ticket, which is half price, and disguises herself as a child and runs into Ray Milland, who finds himself curiously sexually attracted by not knowing, and it disturbs him greatly. Since that was a success, they gave me contact, and I stayed on as a director.
But you were not really satisfied with the system because you wanted to achieve more control. You switched from scriptwriter to director, and then director to producer, producer-director.
And that is the level of the producer who, I'm not talking now about great producers like the Thorbergs and the Selznicks and the Goldwins. I'm talking about a studio producer who, you know, since they cannot write, since they cannot direct, since they cannot act, since they cannot compose, they become the head of everything. And that was the ultimate control. So it was a question of, not of power, but of ultimately having it as close to, on the screen, to what you first imagined, to have it as close to that after the execution.
Ace in the Hole was your first film as a producer?
And believe me, it was a very, very harsh experience. I almost left Paramount because that was before I had the controls, the cutting control and other controls. They just retitled the picture. You know, it was Ace in the Hole. They called it The Big Carnival to recoup some money. Then it was a success in Europe. But I learned my lesson. You know, I insisted on certain things. You know, so they cannot go behind my back and suddenly the picture is retitled, it is recut, it is redubbed, rescored, you know. That is very important. But however, being a very fast shooter of pictures, a picture maker, and not indulging in kind of masturbatory self-exercises of egocentric self-satisfaction, you know. I ultimately achieved the cutting rights from the studio, which is about the best that you can hope for.
The first time I saw the film would have been in the late 1970s, when I was actually working on a book on Wilder with my co-writer Adrian Turner, and he'd arranged a special screening at the National Film Theatre, and could only have come from Billy Wilder, I think, at that particular time. Nobody else was making those kind of films. And I think it was a film, I thought, that was from a director who was completely confident about and in control of what he was doing. I think to the end of his days, he insisted that Ace in the Hole was one of his best films. I mean, there are some of his films that were successful and he didn't particularly like them after a while, and some of his films that were unsuccessful. And he thought maybe done this or that wrong. But with the Ace in the Hole, I think he thought, you know, that's what I wanted to say. Maybe people couldn't take it, but at the same time, you know, it was an uncompromising statement. I made it on my own terms. I think it's a really good movie. I think he was at an interesting point in his career. He just made Sunset Boulevard, which, of course, was again a hard-hitting film about Hollywood, but had been very successful. And it came after he was establishing a reputation during the 1940s as, a hard-hitting director who nevertheless could make harsh statements about American life, but at the same time make them in a way that were palatable to audiences and to be very successful. So he'd done Double Indemnity in 1944, he'd done The Lost Weekend, which of course was an Oscar winner in 1945, A Foreign Affair in 1948, then Sunset Boulevard. And I think he thought he was on a roll. But there were two, I think, distinctive or distinct things about Ace in the Hole, which made it as if it was ushering in a new phase in Wilder's career. For the first time, he was his own producer, which gave him extra scope, I think. And he'd severed the relationship with his co-writer, Charles Brackett. They'd worked on over a dozen films together, so this was a big move on his part. And it does seem to have been Wilder's idea. And the thing about their partnership, I think, which everybody says is that one of the things that made it work is that they were complete opposites. I mean, Brackett was this conservative, reticent, quiet-spoken gentleman. Wilder, of course, was volatile, aggressive, etc. And everybody thought it made a good mix. But the received wisdom was that Brackett was useful because he kept Wilder under control. He, as it were, restrained Wilder from in his worst excesses, if you like. But the thing that was interesting about it, I think it was a genuine partnership, and when he severed his relationship with Brackett, and over the next few years, before he teamed up with I.L. Diamond, he always had collaborators, he always valued collaborators, but I think in the case of the films he made between Ace in the Hole and, as I say before, teaming up with I.L. Diamond on Love in the Afternoon, he was the senior partner. And I think that was certainly the case in the writing of Ace in the Hole. He'd had two co-writers. Walter Newman was a young writer for radio at that time he'd invited in to, he'd heard some stuff on the radio that he liked, and he invited Walter Newman in, and they kicked around various ideas, and they came up with this one finally. And Lester Samuels, who was a staff writer for Paramount with a journalistic background, and he had been nominated for an Oscar the previous year for his work on Joe Mankiewicz's No Way Out. They worked on it on a few weeks, and they couldn't seem to get it together. Newman went back to writing for radio, but then Wilder rang him up one day and he said, that idea you had about the Floyd Collins story? And Floyd Collins was someone in the 1920s who'd been trapped in a cave-in for 18 days. And the coverage of it, of the event, was a media sensation. And the reporter who had covered it, as actually Tatum says in Ace in the Hole, sort of crawled into the hole and then crawled out with a Pulitzer Prize, which is what is behind what he wants to do. And Wilder said, let's work on that. Newman apparently actually wanted to start the film at the point where they arrive at the cave and Escadera. Wilder wanted to lead into it more gradually and to establish the kind of character Tatum was from the outset. The casting of Kirk Douglas, I think, is important. I'm not sure that Wilder actually considered anybody else for the part. He is a very typical Wilder hero in lots of ways. He's unscrupulous, and he's somebody who seizes on the main chance. And you can see lots of parallels between his character and, say, the William Holden character in Sunset Boulevard, who stumbles across this break and tries to exploit it to his own advantage, and then it rebounds on him. But Douglas, I think, is a more abrasive character, more aggressive. He'd begun in films really in the mid-1940s and late 40s in a number of, quite good supporting roles in Build My Gallows High and A Letter to Three Wives, the Mankiewicz film. And The Glass Menagerie as the gentleman caller. He could play charm if he wanted to. But the film that really caught the attention was his performance in Champion, where he played this boxer who will stop at nothing to get to the top, and who will ride roughshod over anybody in his way. And I think that's what Wilder wanted from Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas apparently, at certain moments of the film, said, "Can't you make him a bit more sympathetic?" And Wilder said, "No, give it both knees," he used to say. But Douglas, I think, what he does do with Kirk Douglas is that Douglas is very good at suggesting a kind of vulnerability behind this aggressiveness. Because the thing about the Kirk Douglas screen persona is that the self-assertiveness very often carries within it the seeds of his own self-destruction as well. And the characters he played around, Ace in the Hole, like the tough cop in Wilder's detective story, who is also going to come to a tragic end, really because of flaws in his own character. And the producer in Minnelli's Bad and the Beautiful, similarly, who is, at certain points, his ruthlessness alienates everybody around him. Even in later films like Lust for Life, where he plays Van Gogh, and Spartacus, there's always an element of kind of masochism and martyrdom about the heroism, and that it's, as they used to say, he's one of those actors that you can kill off at the end of a film without audiences bothering too much, whilst admiring his performance. I think actually that's one of the interesting things about Ace in the Hole, because Wilder always had a particular ending in mind. This character has to die, he said. He hadn't worked out until a late stage exactly how to do it, but he knew he had to. And yet, there are elements of Wilder himself in this character, I think, and certainly Wilder as a filmmaker. If Tatum is taking risks in this story, so is Wilder. And I always love the scene in Ace in the Hole when he's just been to see Leo and he realizes that unless he does something, the one thing that he needs to deliver in this story, which is a happy ending of Leo being saved, it might not happen. And I always wonder whether Wilder himself was thinking, in a way, like Tatum, I'm under pressure to deliver a happy ending, but I realize I can't. It's taken away from me somehow, and I must see this thing through to the finish, and take the consequences. I don't think Wilder wanted a happy ending, but I do think, that he's almost setting the audience up to expect now, that you think there's going to be an easy resolution to this, but in fact, I've set everything up in such a way that is going to be impossible. We're going to have to see this through to its tragic conclusion. Jan Sterling in interviews apparently said, she didn't think this character was bad. She understood, why she wanted to get out of this situation. She'd been tricked into marriage in a way by Leo because he'd exaggerated, the kind of home he was bringing her to. We learned that she's, tried to run away, and he always brought her back. So, she's in an unhappy marriage, and her perception is, this is an opportunity to get out of it, and I won't be dishonest enough to play, this is initially anyway, the loyal, suffering wife. I think the other reason why I find the character very, very interesting, I think Wilder did as well, to be honest, she's given some of the best lines in the film, and I think Wilder doesn't do that unless he thinks there's something in the character. You're quite interested in this character. She's the one character in the film who can give as good as she gets when she's confronted by Tatum. She sees through him very, very quickly. She was nominated for an Oscar for The High and the Mighty, but I think she was very hard to cast in a way, and Ace in the Hole remains, I think, the performance above all for which she'll be remembered. One of the things that's ironic, I always think about Ace in the Hole, is that it's one of Wilder's visually most spectacular films, and yet the film, of course, is an attack on spectacle, on somebody's tragedy being turned into this media event. Again, one of the ironies, I think, of the film, when it wasn't taking off in America, they changed the title, and it was the suggestion of the Paramount boss, why Frank Freeman, and Wilder always thought that was a question rather than a name, and they gave the title. He called it The Big Carnival, and Wilder said, "Well, that's horrendous, because makes it sound like something like Cecil B. DeMille, but it's the fact that they're turning this event into a carnival that the film is attacking. You're just highlighting the thing that the film is actually sort of deploring. Another unusual facet of the film is that quite a lot of it was shot on location, and Wilder wasn't noted as a location director by any means, but they shot a lot of it in Gallup, New Mexico, and he clearly saw that the setting, the whole landscape of it, was very, very important. It's part of Lorraine's desperation. She is in this desert. She can't get out of it. The score is by Hugo Friedhofer. I think it's the only time he actually worked with Wilder. Wilder apparently said to him at one stage, there are no themes in this score. And Friedhofer said, well, do you want me to soften the blow? You haven't. Interesting scene that, incidentally, is it when they were rehearsing it, Douglas had said to Jan Sterling, give me a signal when I go a bit too far. And in fact, he nearly actually choked her at that particular point. And he said, why didn't you give me a signal? He said, I couldn't, I couldn't actually say anything, But he got so, wound up into the role at that particular point. I think Wilder's treatment of Leo is very brave because he doesn't make him a sentimental victim. We are allowed to see his flaws, and we are allowed to see that the most sympathetic thing about him is basically his situation. And the casting, actually, of Richard Benedict is quite interesting in that, because he was just a reliable supporting actor. I think if he really wanted to make a big thing of Leo as a character, he'd have cast somebody else. He didn't want that. He wanted somebody who was fairly ordinary, who wouldn't be a face that audiences necessarily instantly recognised or sympathised with, which of course reinforces the point about Leo suddenly being thrust into the limelight, not because of who he is, but because of what Tatum is actually making him out to be, and making his situation out to be. The other thing I think that's really interesting about the character of Leo, though, is that he never does find out about, the true story and about Tatum. He dies thinking that Tatum, is one of his best friends. And one of the words, I think, that becomes very sinister as the film develops is the word friend. Lorraine, who is the third Wilder heroine to kill the hero in the film. But the difference with Lorraine, of course, is that she just walks out of the picture unpunished, where the Hays Code would certainly have expected some kind of resolution. I suppose they were satisfied with the fact that Tatum dies at the end, but there are all these other loose ends. I mean, I'm always struck by the fact that, this is, 1950, 51 when this film is being made and released. Where, Hollywood is being investigated by HUAC. The McCarthyist thing is about to explode, etc. Wilder is making a film in which the forces of law and order are seen to be practically irredeemably corrupt, it seems. He's making a film that I think a lot of people at the time would have identified as a very American kind of story of somebody who is will do anything for the big break, somebody who's looking to satisfy his own particular ambition and realizes and nothing must stand in his way. I mean, Wilder always said that, that actually he wasn't making a statement about America as such or Americans necessarily. It was about human beings as he saw it. But I think critics at the time, I know Jan Sterling said when she was asked why the film wasn't successful, she said that it was thought to be un-American. To make a film as pessimistic at that particular time was seen to be, unpatriotic. And you can parallel it with, William Wyler making Carrie at that time, his film of the Theodore Dreiser novel, which also ends as bleakly as you can imagine a film ending. Or John Huston's Red Badge of Courage, which was chopped to pieces by MGM because of its, it had a portrait of what war does to people in a way that they found unacceptable. So Wilder actually making a film like Ace in the Hole at the time must have seemed a tremendous, I was going to say risk. I mean, I don't think he necessarily thought it was a risk. He set out what he wanted to do. But I can't believe he was under no illusions about the kind of stir it might make. I mean, if you make a film that is attacking journalism and also attacking mass audiences in a way, and how easily they're manipulated, you can hardly be surprised if the critics don't like it and the audiences stay away. But you can understand why European critics would see it somewhat differently. Not simply in terms of, we perhaps can see Americans in a more critical light than they can see themselves. But after all, we're talking about a film that was made only sort of 5 years or so after World War II. Wilder has lost members of his family in concentration camps at Auschwitz. Would he really have any illusions about the depravities that humanity is capable of, or the way that masses of people can be manipulated by a megalomaniac? I don't think so.